Tiar, in the interest of time to be on schedule, I think we can start.
Yes, I think we can. Elizabeth, over to you.
Morning, good midday, good evening, everyone. As president of ISOCARP since a few months, I would like to welcome everyone from all over the world and thank you for joining this Cyber Agora with the thought-provoking title, 𝗔𝗴𝗶𝗺 Matter for Planners. I also want to welcome all the partners and the speakers. And this Cyber Agora that we organized in partnership with the Royal Town Planning Institute, for which many thanks. Our partnership has been deepening over the years and particularly on this topic. Yesterday, I met with the new president whose inauguration happened here in London yesterday, and I'm confident too that we strengthen this partnership and particularly in this area. And again, congratulations to her. At the same time, since 2024, we are part of the 𝗤𝗵𝗄 family, that is the local government and municipal authority constituency at COP. Also very relevant, seeing the local impacts at the local level and the impact that local level can create, the responsibility and the need for climate leadership, particularly important at the city level. But today I also want to announce a happy celebration. It's a very special day. Exactly 60 years ago, on 23 January 1965, ISOCARP was founded in Amsterdam, the Netherlands. Visionary planners came together to create a society and enable the sharing and co-creation of knowledge globally and pushing the agenda globally, because since the start we have been putting topics related to climate, hot and cool climate, sustainable energy on the agenda of our world planning congresses, for instance. So we want to keep on pushing the agenda, and that's also what we do today. And in this undertaking, the collaboration and partnerships become even more important. So because it's a special day, I invite you to take your favorite drink, sit back, listen, and then participate, whether it be a coffee, a tea, or something sparkling. A little bit on the context for ISOCARP, it's very important. The COP as a global platform for addressing climate change and the relevance of climate action for urban and regional planning. Especially this new membership to the 𝗤𝗵𝗄 and the close collaboration with partners. However, we see a representation lack of planners. There is, however, a promise, and that's our commitment to sustainable urban development and the alignment with the COP goals, which is mainstreamed through our working group, which is the Initiative on Climate Resilient Planning. And there is an opportunity and I believe a responsibility, but I leave this for the discussion in the Cyber Agora. So with this, I'd like to hand over to my colleague Beatrice from the RTPI. Welcome again.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth, for this very warm welcome. My name is Beatrice Crabb. I'm a chartered planner and the international manager at the Royal Town Planning Institute. And on behalf of the Institute, I would like to welcome you all to this event. It's a real pleasure to be with you all. And I would also like to take the opportunity to wish ISOCARP a very happy 60th anniversary. For those who are not familiar with the Institute, I just wanted to say a few words about who we are. We are an international professional body for planners with over 27,000 members worldwide. And as an institute, we are committed to advancing the science and the art of planning, working for long-term common good and well-being of current and future generation. And climate is very much a priority for us as we recognize that planners, together with other built environment professions, have a key contribution to make in addressing this global challenge and lead on climate action and help build a more sustainable world. We are therefore very pleased to collaborate with ISOCARP on climate action, and particularly focusing on the intersection between planning and climate resilience. As Elizabeth mentioned, this event is the second event in the series, part of the Initiative for Climate Resilience Planning, and we very much hope that it will provide a platform for learning and the exchange of ideas to support and encourage planners and built environment professionals to lead on climate action and influence better outcomes. We very much look forward to stimulating conversation on why COP matters for planners. And I will now, without a further delay, hand over to our first speaker, Yunus Arikan, who will briefly introduce himself before diving into our discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Beatrice, and thank you, Elizabeth. It's a great pleasure. It's truly a delight for me to join in the special day to celebrate the 60th anniversary of the ISOCARP, to join this important gathering and share our insights on the climate negotiations. My name is Yunus Arikan. I'm the Director of Global Advocacy at 𝗖𝗶𝗁, Local Governments for Sustainability. I'm also an environmental engineer by profession, and in my early times in Turkey, when I was actively involved in our professional engagement for the Chamber of Environmental Engineers, I was also familiar with the concept of the importance of the networks of experts or professional bodies. So having this collaboration is really true delight, and I would like to wish you many success in years ahead. Obviously, 𝗖𝗶𝗁 is, and for those who are not familiar, we are a very close let's say, partner actor to ISOCARP. We are a network of local and regional governments across all sizes in more than 130 countries, with a network of 2,500 cities, towns, even states in many countries. So we have been living the legacy of the local Agenda 21. So we try to drive our members and collectively work to contribute to the global sustainability through zero emissions, nature-based, resilient, circular, and people-centered approach. So in my presentation, I will not focus too much on the 𝗖𝗶𝗁, but 𝗖𝗶𝗁 is particularly has a responsibility in this climate process, because we also, as mentioned by Elizabeth, collectively facilitate our engagement in the UN climate processes. Obviously, maybe I should also make another note, because it's professional discussions here, environmental engineers and planners, but also the bodies of the local governments and the planners. Let's be realistic. There is an ideal world that every city should be planned, every landscape should be designed so that it ensures livability and secures resources and protects the planet and its surrounding as well, in the settlements. But there's also a reality. There are a lot of cities across the world, be it the global north and south, that even local regional governments or their councils are not too much taking into account the planners. They don't listen to the voices of the planners. And in fact, this is a reason why it is important to have this discussion. So because we have to make sure that the science and professional information guides politicians, and we also know the cities are beyond mayors. They are also beyond planners. It's a living organism, and there are a lot of factors, but planners and local governments should be working together, their administrations and councils. So here we are. Maybe we start with what is this LGMA, in the sense this is really the voice of towns, cities, and regions. They're especially the networks of their bodies to influence the climate negotiations. Obviously, this is we're talking about intergovernmental processes, national governments, ministers of environment, or ministers of foreign affairs. So we neither experts nor and civil society nor local engineers are decision makers, but especially with the spirit of the Earth Summit, we are a part of this process. We will touch this on the next slide, but we basically participate in negotiations. We set the action agenda, which is those who do not necessarily wait for agreements. And I'm very happy to say that under the Marrakesh Partnership, there is also a working group under the Human Settlements Built Environment, which is also very related to the ISOCARP community. We work with the presidencies. They have special mandate in driving this year-round engagements. And we also advance with our dialogue with the Friends of Multi-Level Action, which means the governments who are the ones who decide on these decisions and the main responsible for implementation. We are talking about 30 plus years. In that regard, to this year is also celebrating the 30th anniversary of the climate conference. The first one was in Berlin in '95. Sorry, I'm just having some difficulty with my throat. If we look at these 30 plus years, there are four main phases. The first years, we were excited, but because of the legacy of Rio, but the Rio conventions and engagement in the UNFCCC was a bit different. So we had the first 10 years a bit silent. So we were not too much active. Starting with the Kyoto Protocol entry and especially the design of a new phase, we said that let's not repeat the same mistakes. The UNFCCC and Kyoto ignores us. The new regime, which was supposed to be in Copenhagen, should recognize, engage, and empower local and regional governments. In Copenhagen, we were strong, but the process failed or gave a break. But the local governments said that we even have to be more stronger, and because the global multilateralism helps local governments to act better, that they can come over their national challenges, that they can be better convince their citizens. Therefore, even after Copenhagen, our efforts accelerated. So we have initiated new processes inside and outside. It was a dynamic process, and there was the moment where we started to make sure cities are not seen as a threat to the nations, but they are starting to become more partners. And that proved its fruit in the Paris Agreement, that we have the recognition of all levels of government. So it was immediately afterwards that our engagement exploded, literally. This was a demonstration that as soon as local and regional governments involved in a global process, they can help to its contribution of its delivery mechanisms. Because recognition is just one thing, but bringing on board is another thing. So in this process, there were so many initiatives inside and outside UNFCCC, so many new processes of our networks. But especially, we had made the change of the notion that in this Paris Agreement era, all hands on deck. So our second achievement was that in 2021, in the Glasgow Climate Conference, we had the recognition of the multi-level action, which means not just being aware that, yes, you exist, but national governments are also now asked to work with their local governments. And that gave us the way where in Sharm el-Sheikh, in Dubai, and in Baku, we have created numerous initiatives. We managed to bring, first time ever, urban and climate ministers on the same topic in the climate process. We have created an initiative on sustainable urbanization in Sharm el-Sheikh. And in Dubai, we have also brought the mechanisms called CHAMP, which is the national governments committing to work with their local and regional governments. And this spirit also reflected into the UNFCCC decisions, paragraph 161. And in Baku, for the first time, the negotiators of mitigation, which is the reduction of emissions, they focused on cities and urban spaces. This is showing just a kind of the atmosphere. We are more than 60 partners, and ISOCARP, as Elizabeth mentioned, has been involved in one of our newest members. But we are very happy that we have already built a very good relation, and that their contribution had been extremely valuable, bringing the voice of science and experts of the space. So we participate in the ministerial meetings, deliver our statements, but also set the scene for us that this is not just a diplomat space, but also mayors, local leaders, and their partners are part of it. You can see our flagship initiative as the co-convener, 𝗂𝗏𝗏 𝗖𝗵𝘆 convenes the multi-level action organization pavilion for many years now in the negotiations area. That is our home for all our efforts. This year, especially in Baku, we were very excited to collaborate with Azerbaijan, the State Planning Committee for Urban Planners. Again, the dialogue between national governments, the planning agencies, and urbanization pavilion and multi-level action demonstrates how much we are advancing. I know why we have a brilliant lineup of speakers in this session, so I will not go into details, but I will conclude with a couple of highlights. This mitigation work program was a year-round discussions. It was particularly focused on cities, buildings, and urban system. It sounds very normal for many of you, but it was so difficult to bring the climate community to have a discussion on especially mitigation and buildings and urban system. The first such thing was 10, 12 years ago in Warsaw. I was there. It was so difficult because national government was saying that this is a domestic agenda. Global agenda should have no say on our independent authorities. But since then, the national governments, especially, they have advanced a lot. So there is this recognition of this text in the decision of mitigation work program. It could have been better, but you can see, for example, spatial planning is recognized for the first time. It is really putting the emphasis that it is not just individual projects, but it's a collective system-wide approach. That is something that is very valuable. We have supported the multi-sectoral action pathways. Again, it is the World Urban Forums, the World Environment Days, this climate conference should all work together, and there should be continuity in these processes. This is important. This year's highlighted that the new national climate plans will be presented. The good news, there are more and more countries stepping up to bring local voices, like climate federalism in the Brazilian NDC, the US NDC, the Panama NDC, the Emirates NDC. They are all very, very promising because they have been the ones who have committed for multi-level action. You see, there is still 2/3 of the world have still not fully benefit from the potential of their urban action. So the leadership from CHAMP and the initiatives like MAP is important that this year at the capitals, this has to come onto the game. One important agenda, the scientific knowledge on climate is designed by the IPCC. It's an intergovernmental body. So scientists plus national experts. Since 2016, we have been pushing the agenda that they should have a discussion on cities. For years, it was engineers. For years, it was lawyers or climatologists. Starting from 2016, there is more and more efforts to open the space for urban community, urban practitioners, the anthropologists, sociologists. And now we are very excited. This new spatial report that's coming in March 27 will be an opportunity that we can shape the design of the 1.5-degree or climate neutral world through scientific and technical information about the city's action as well. And my last slide, this year we are particularly putting our emphasis that the global processes have their own routine, and it's even less powerful because of the global geopolitics. So there is a much more demand to trigger action at the national level. So we are calling for every local energy government to turn their town halls to a mini COP. So they don't have to go to a COP, travel around the world, but they can bring the debate at home. And in that regard, I will be very happy to listen to the rest of the other speakers, but I have three concrete proposals to ISOCARP community here. First of all, help us. Talk to your local governments and ask them to be involved in this town hall COPs sometime this from the Earth Day in 2022 towards until the COP. Second, please bring your scientific and technical knowledge to the spatial report. There is an important process going on. And third, in the climate space, build on what we have achieved with these initiatives, especially on urbanization, but particularly there is a process called non-market approaches, and we are trying to bring sustainable urbanization as a non-market approach, which is the new future that we can build together. I know the time is limited, therefore I would like to keep my presentation here and happy to come on to the Q&A session as well.
Thank you very much, Yunus. Yunus, thank you for the presentation. Hi, everyone. I'm Olafiyin Taiwo, and I'm a lecturer at the University of Brighton. I'm also the chair for the Commonwealth Association of Planners, the Young Planners Network, as well as the co-chair for the Planners for Climate Action, UN Habitat initiative. I would like to start my discussion with reference to the MAP, the Multi-Sectoral Action Pathways Declaration for Resilient and Healthy Cities, which was launched by the COP29 presidency and has been endorsed by 160 stakeholders ranging from city mayors to country leaders. Some of the key points from the declaration includes integrating health considerations into planning and policies, encouraging adoption of green infrastructure, renewable energy solutions, sustainable transportation systems towards promoting sustainable urban development, as well as also facilitating partnerships among governments at all levels, private sectors, and civil society to implement effective and inclusive climate actions through enhancing multi-sectoral collaboration. And finally, strengthening urban capacity to withstand and adapt to climate-related disasters through improved infrastructure, emergency preparedness, and disaster risk reduction towards building resilience against climate risk. I want to start, you have mentioned that the voices of planners must be heard, and the cities are beyond mayors, and planning, as we know, is an interdisciplinary field, and at its core, it's collaborative working at different spatial levels. So my question to you to start this discussion is, what synergies can be created between planners across the different sectors, academia, local government, private sector, civil society, and the local and regional government to ensure multi-level actions are strongly connected to climate actions, urbanization, and amongst the other complex challenges that we know that cities face?
So thanks a lot. So I think as we mentioned, cities are organical structures, and if they are purposefully planned, they really serve to the purpose to preserve livelihoods and contribute to global sustainability. I think we have to rebring this notion that it's not by chance if we see failing cities around the world because that they are driven by, especially in the last 200 years or 300 years, which are built around a fossil fuel consumption and production. So we have to be aware there are cities around the world which has a history of thousands of years of legacy. They were there before oil and automotive or the combustion engine was created. So we have to be aware the cities are for people, not for cars. And why it is important? Because for a long time we thought this was a debate for a citizen or neighborhood. Or for a long time we thought fossil fuel divesting is not an agenda for cities. But in fact, it is very relevant because especially if we're in an urban world, the way we will design our cities better will help national governments and the global community to shape this process. So I think we could start to bring this idea that we have to meet with our constituencies, we have to listen to the scientists, from the climate neutralities to loss and damage. As long as we can have informed decisions, we can assure we can succeed. There is a huge, of course, lack of motivation at the moment. People are stepping out of the Paris Agreement. They are saying that there's not more left to do, but we do not have the luxury to give up. And I think the mayors, the governors should not see planners as something that they have to get away with or deal with, but they have to work with. And then they have to say that as long as we have my partners on board, the cities and mayors could commit, and governors as well, they can commit to climate neutrality. They can serve for their citizens, and they need resources, information, and guidance, and partnership and engagement. Maybe I could say that, and I think the initiatives that you mentioned, we have much more ingredients in our hands. We have a lot of opportunities to offer this, showing that you have committed to these ideas, you have your partners behind you, let them come on board, let them show these discussions, and then bring the results to your national governments as a solution-oriented approach.
Thank you. Thank you. And just following up on that, it's just part of what you've just mentioned around the support for cities that is required. In terms of finance, which is an area where planning is not usually mentioned and the role is not usually mentioned, and it's seen as the recommendation by planners. It doesn't normally sound viable. My second topic is, in this form where we need support for cities in form of finance, funding to tackle this, it's as critical as technical support. So what role can planners play in supporting cities towards securing these critical resources and bearing in mind the need for technical resources as well to leverage budget?
So there are two aspects of this. First of all, climate was for a long time an agenda of environment people or environment ministers. And not all of these are aware of the role that local engineers or even the Minister of Urbanization can offer. And let's be realistic, especially in the global south, the budgets controlled by ministers of planning agencies, investment, public works, they have a huge potential of controlling investments and implementing budgets that is much bigger than the ministers of environment budgets. And this has not been used effectively. So there is a need to bring ministers of environment and urbanization together, and then mayors could be the one that can bridge this. And that's what the role that ICLEI and 𝗟𝗓𝗔 has played. So we push this idea to speak at the UN Habitat Assembly, to speak at the climate conferences. But there's another aspect as well. For a long time, climate debate was a climate market. It was a carbon market. And by default, markets do not serve for planners. We were being exposed in this idea of the Kyoto Protocol was a reality of the 1990s, that the free market, the capital was the only thing that rules the world. And we saw that it's not happening. It is not helping us forward. So this idea of bringing planned approaches is giving the chance that urban planning can come into the board. And here we also have another challenge. We are seeing that there is new cities being built across the world. We are seeing new Jakarta, new Tehran, new Dar es Salaam, new Cairo. None of the cities are designed or planned by the mayors or the governors of these current cities. They are designed by their national governments. So there's another aspect to make sure that these decisions, they should say that we will not follow business as usual. We will have to follow a climate friendly, and a city of the future in the new Jakarta should be much more environmental safe and environment friendly. Unfortunately, it's not easy. Even in California, you may have heard, as soon as the disaster exploded, one of the things that the government has adopted is that the legendary California climate and environment rule is not anymore will be applying for the new design of this redesign of these areas that are under fire. This is really a pity, which means we are sacrificing once again, and we will be repeating the same old urban sprawl and the same mistakes that has been done before. So if we want to attract more climate finance, we have to ensure that it is by purpose. It is not a city that it's individual buildings, it's individual just electric vehicles. It has to be a collective planning. You cannot think about, oh, I'm building a fantastically energy efficient building, but you don't think about how you ensure mobility, how you provide waste management. So these are not isolated things, but for years we were forced to think about this silo thinking. So this new reality is giving us the opportunity that the ideas that we have been speaking for decades, I mean, ISOCARP is championing this planning for 60 years. It was not possible, but now we have more tools, and climate emergency is giving us the chance that we can bring this on power. We can turn these ideas into practice much more effectively.
Thank you. In the interest of time, we will need to move on. Thank you.
Yes, maybe I just use this for 1 second as a transition to the next speaker, to first of all thank you all, of course, for being here, but also to explain a little bit our concept behind this webinar. So this was now the big picture, and now we have 3 different topics, starting with mitigation, then adaptation, and loss and damage. So with that, I hand it over to Theodora.
Thank you very much. So I will quickly share my screen in presenter mode. Okay, this should be it. Oh no, wait, this is not it. Stop sharing. Sorry. Apologies.
While you do that, Theodora, just the first session
Yes.
on adaptation and is on mitigation, and it focuses on transport and the decarbonization of transport. The second session is on water and adaptation, meaning making space for water in the context of adaptation, and the last session is loss and damage in identification of vulnerabilities. And each session has an expert speaker that is planner, and then is matched with the planner to ask questions. If you press,
okay,
see, perfect.
I hope that this works right now.
Works great.
And perfect. All right. So yeah, thank you very much for this opportunity to join you for this very exciting webinar. Teodora 𝗖𝗵, I'm a policy analyst at SLOCAT, the Partnership on Sustainable Low Carbon Transport. And as some of you may know, we have been involved very closely in the COP process for many years, supporting the overall engagement of the transport community, the sustainable low carbon transport community in the process. And just like 𝗖𝗍𝗍, we deploy a number of methods to do so, including direct engagements with the COP presidencies. We are also the official focal point for the engagement of the transport community in the Marrakesh Partnership for Global Climate Action. And as such, we support the implementation of the Paris Agreement by enabling a closer collaboration between governments, as well as cities, regions, businesses, and investors. And in addressing the guiding question of today's webinar, does COP matter for planners? I was planning to first highlight the key role that urban planners play in driving the decarbonization of transport and mobility systems in cities. Building on this, I will share the main outcomes of COP29 for urban mobility, and ultimately what they mean for urban mobility and planners. And lastly, I would reflect on some of the key opportunities that come along with the next round of nationally determined contributions to be submitted ahead of COP30. So I wanted to set the scene with a visual that conveys a clear message, and namely that drastic and deep emission cuts will be needed across all transport modes in order to set the transport sector on a pathway to net zero emissions by 2050. This is against the backdrop of the transport sector accounting for 16% of global greenhouse gas emissions in 2023, and being the second largest greenhouse gas emitter after the power industry. Transport is also experiencing the fastest growth in CO2 emissions among combustion sectors globally, and these alarming trends really underscore the need for coordinated efforts between national and subnational governments in order to set ambitious, robust, and actionable targets and roadmaps to decarbonize and the sector. So urban planners will be central in aligning urban transport with global climate and sustainability agendas. This has to do with the fact that cities house around 56% of the world's population and account for more than 60% of all kilometers driven. As a result, transport in cities today actually in 2020 accounted for 8% of global CO2 emissions and around 40% of global transport emissions. Having said that, it should be noted that roughly half of the world's population continues to lack access to public transport. And as a result of this, emissions, air pollution, and energy demand will linked to urban mobility are likely to continue increasing for the years to come. In the absence of targeted interventions, motorized mobility is projected to surge in cities by roughly 94% by 2050. Needless to say, this kind of unprecedented change will entail risks in the form of locking us into energy-intensive patterns of accessibility and urban form. And here I wanted to quickly highlight the fact that the challenges to transforming urban mobility systems will be particularly pronounced in low and middle income countries, given that these are needing to balance between decarbonizing their national transport sectors and continuing to evolve and enhance their transport connectivity and accessibility in order to continue advancing socioeconomic development. At the same time, these countries are oftentimes hampered in the adoption of sustainable urban mobility policies and their access to climate finance because of limited data, capacity, and inadequate policy frameworks. Speaking of access to climate finance, this is indeed a major obstacle in the way of the transition of the transport sector's transition to net zero emissions. And it's been a very hot topic at COP29, which was widely dubbed as the finance COP. To illustrate, even though transport currently accounts for 29% of climate finance, it is the sector with the largest investment gap. Actually, studies show that clean transport solutions would cost an estimated 2.7 trillion annually between now and 2050, and this constitutes 7 times the current spending on transport. And once again, the investment gap is particularly pronounced in low and middle income countries, given their continuously growing transport systems and their difficulty in attracting climate finance due to unstable political and macroeconomic landscapes, high interest rates, growing debt levels, and limited capacity to develop bankable projects. So what were actually the main outcomes of COP, and what do they mean for urban planners? So indeed, given the shortfall of climate finance for transport, there were high expectations that COP29 would deliver a very strong climate finance outcome. However, after 2 weeks of intense negotiations and years in the making, developed countries landed a last-minute deal to contribute $300 billion by 2035 to developing countries starting from next year. This is to form part of a wider collaborative effort to scale financing from all public and private sources, amounting to at least $1.3 trillion per year by 2035. As a result, the majority of the financing will actually rely on private investment as well as alternative sources, both of which entail uncertainties regarding their realization. And the result is that the agreed outcome falls short of meeting the needs of the transport sector, as underlined in the previous slide, and those of developing nations. Besides its insufficient quantity, the agreed climate goal was also broadly criticized for its poor qualitative criteria, so the poor provisions to ensure certain the integrity and to optimize the use of the funding. For instance, there were no sub-targets to distribute the financial flows to mitigation versus adaptation or loss and damage. There were no obligations to prioritize grants over loans, and there were also no safeguards to preclude that investments in fossil fuel infrastructure could potentially classify as climate finance, this being particularly important for the transport sector as a very capital-intensive and fossil fuels-dependent sector. Now, even though climate finance was formed the center stage, took center stage at COP29, it was definitely not the only critical topic under discussion. Another main outcome, or rather the lack thereof, that needs to be highlighted is parties' failure to reach an agreement on how to take forward the outcomes of the first global stocktake that was adopted at COP28 in Dubai. For those of you that may not know, the global stocktake is a central component of the Paris Agreement that refers to this collective evaluation, so the evaluation process of the collective progress towards set goals. And the global stocktake was broadly welcomed by the transport community because it made important direct and indirect references to the transport sector, urging the need to accelerate the reduction of emissions from road transport on a range of pathways, including through the deployment of infrastructure and the deployment of zero and low emission vehicles. It also signaled the need to transition away from fossil fuels, as well as to phase out inefficient fossil fuel subsidies, all very much resonating strongly with the transport sector. Despite the failure of countries to reach an agreement on how to advance these outcomes, it's important that in the coming months, leading up to COP30, the Global Stocktake acts as a guiding pillar in informing national climate pledges, NDCs, and transport targets and actions stipulated within these. When it comes to the preparation and implementation of these national plans, it will be crucial that governments really coordinate across all levels so that national policies can enable cities to truly leverage the full potential of public transport and active mobility. Here, for instance, the so-called 𝗬𝗵𝘁𝗶𝗵𝗃 framework will play a crucial role in terms of guiding decarbonization efforts, given that it aims to guarantee access to mobility while at the same time prioritizing actions that avoid unnecessary motorized trips. They shift to less carbon-intensive modes and improve energy efficiency, vehicle design, and clean energy sources. Growing evidence is showing that avoid and shift measures can actually account for up to 60% of total transport emission reductions at lower cost than improved measures. However, latest NDCs seem to show a dominance of improved measures, which account for over 50% of all transport-related measures. This imbalance needs to be corrected if we're to make meaningful progress towards our climate goals. One way of achieving this would be, as already hinted by previous speakers, to ensure closer integration between urban planning and public transport planning, which currently appears to be rather siloed, in order to promote compact cities served by efficient public transport and active high shares of modal shares of active mobility. We are seeing positive developments with more cities committing to net zero and unveiling sustainable mobility plans, but we are not quite seeing a coordinated approach and alignment between national and subnational level actions. In fact, 1 in 3 countries have yet to integrate public transport strategies into their nationally determined contributions. In fact, out of the countries that have public transport strategies in their NDCs, only a third of these actually include concrete budgets on how to support the proposed actions. So alignment will be central if we are to ensure progress. To conclude, since I am aware I'm running out of time, I wanted to just highlight the important and critical window of opportunity that we're facing this year with COP30 being referred to as the COP of COPs by Brazil's environment minister. In order and for urban mobility, this is a unique opportunity to ensure that ambitious targets are integrated into NDCs and accompanied by strengthened capacities and mobilized financial resources to support the transformation. In conclusion, I wanted to bring your attention to the SLOCAT NDC 3.0 library, which is available on our website. And what it is an ongoing compilation of useful resources, templates, guidelines, and tools prepared by various organizations and initiatives in the sustainable transport community that seek to help countries to integrate ambitious transport actions into their national climate pledges. The website also includes our own SLOCAT recommendations to boost ambition in transport measures in NDCs, with specific and actionable recommendations on mitigation, target setting, finance, and 𝗬𝗵𝘁𝗶𝗵𝗃 framework, among others. So yeah, I hope it provides a good bridge to the discussion, and thank you very much for your time.
Over to Martina. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Martina Juvara. I'm a strategic planner and a member of ISOCARP and a member of the group that deals with the 𝗤𝗍. I've been to COP several times and passionate, believing on the role of planning into achieving this that I consider the most for our future. I have a few questions from sort of like, the first one is really on the role of getting the public on board. And I have, can you hear me still? No.
I get the message. I get the overall. So there was some disturbance, but.
Okay, so yes, the role of convincing the public when the mantra is, oh, just switch your car to an electric car and everything will be fine. Can you say something in the meantime that I sort out what's going on?
Thank you, Martina, for this question. So indeed, calling on the public to reduce, to take action by reducing leisure flights or switching away from internal combustion engines to electric cars, it is indeed part of the solution, not least because it helps to lower individual carbon footprints. But indeed, it could, I mean, it does oversimplify the issue by shifting responsibility away from systemic structural change onto personal action. So while individual steps are important, meaningful climate progress will require structural and systemic changes and reforms like investing in public transport, decarbonizing energy grids, implementing policies that reduce car dependency, and measures that help to cut emissions from the aviation sector, among others. These in turn will necessitate regulatory and economic reforms and coordinated efforts at all levels in order for the implementation to be effective. It's also important to note that individual actions, they do not operate in a vacuum, and they are informed by pricing mechanisms as well as by the availability of alternatives. So we cannot possibly expect individuals to opt for cleaner transport modes if the price that they have to pay does not reflect the entirety of the external costs that they generate on the environment and society at large. So one obvious example here being the tax exemptions for jet fuel in aviation. Until flying remains cheaper as an alternative to cross-border trains, we're unlikely to see significant change in individual action. So perhaps in conclusion, individual actions are important. They can succeed and complement, but definitely not replace systemic and structural solutions that we urgently need.
I have a couple of other questions. One is from chat, but I'll simplify and I'll tell you both in one go so that maybe respond. The first is the planners have been very keen on this concept of the 15-minute city or proximity planning, so that you have your facilities, you create a neighborhood with a soul where you actually stay rather than a neighborhood from which you commute. Also, we imagine as planners that that would be a sea change in terms of decarbonizing transport. Is that a real thing, or is just a sort of like a catchy concept? And then in the chat, there is something about active travel, and that you have a guide for active travel for NDCs related to active travel, and therefore basically that active travel a global contributor to the climate agenda. So if you can say something about the importance of active travel and the importance of the proximity concept.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, these are all very relevant and important questions. And my initial answer would be yes. I mean, absolutely focusing on public transport and the localization of services through the construction of these 15-minute cities, or proximity planning, as it's called, can significantly decarbonize transport by reducing the need for car trips, encouraging walking, cycling, active transport, and public transport use in general, and denser urban development is also shown to be more conducive to the more cost-efficient provision of public transport, which is quite important in alleviating these financial burdens on public authorities. In contrast, lower density urban development tends to increase the costs for both public and private motorized transportation. Proximity planning, I mean, it is crucial for lowering emissions, reducing congestion, as well as cutting infrastructure and operational costs by promoting these compact, efficient cities. Besides the environmental benefits, which are vast, there's also very important socioeconomic benefits in terms of creating more cohesive societies and more just and livable cities. In practice, however, there has been mixed results indeed. I mean, just to name some of the barriers, we do know that some industry sectors, for instance, the automotive industry or construction or real estate, these sort of sectors, which play a very prominent role in cities, they tend to be a little bit more skeptical and, more difficult to change and more dependent on the business as usual urbanization model. So these have been definitely barriers in the way to seeing a wider, spread of these compact cities. Consumer preferences also are not too easy to change, and we've seen that with car ownership and suburban lifestyle preferences. These are things that are particularly difficult to change in developing countries where perhaps you do have safety concerns, or the lack of viable alternatives do play a role. And not least, I think the fragmentation in the that I referred to, and other speakers also mentioned, between urban planning and transport planning. It also stands in the way of more cohesive planning that would eventually deliver better results in terms of
Thank you.
Thank you very
Okay.
much.
All right, over to Thomas. Thank you.
Thank you, and then thank you, previous speakers, for the insights and the sharing of knowledge. I will try to bring a part of the perspectives. I hope you can see my presentation now. Please let me know. CV, or Stockholm International Water Institute, as I work for, is a convening, we tend to say, thought leader that brings together science, policy, and practitioners. So it's very relevant to in terms of our collaborations with both the academics, but also the policymakers and the practitioners, the private and public sectors that are very close to the subject that we are talking about today. Dear fellow urban planners and water and climate friends, thank you for having me today, as this is aimed to explore the critical intersection between international climate processes and water policy and urban town planning. So I think we've said it, worth repeating. We stand here in 2025. The urgency of our climate crisis has only intensified and will further intensify, and the role of water and climate aspects in adaptation and mitigation efforts are increasingly and on a daily basis actually apparent across cities and urban regions. Going back to the context that we operate in, so we are the coordinator and are the convener of a partner group or a collective of about 86 partners at the moment under the umbrella of the Water for Climate Pavilion. It's a cross-sectoral department collaboration, and trying to work on the global aspects, on the international processes, but also bring it down to the ground to be in effect, and to bring policies, global and international policymakers, to take decisions that also can be brought back from experience into the next versions of whatever policy we're talking about. And I have to say that despite the lack of capacity of the UNFCCC process to support regional processes and regionalization, it is becoming more and more apparent that it's an important element in climate action, since many water and climate discussions need to be rooted in local realities where it impacts and are most acutely felt. So for action to be effective and for financing flows to be better targeted, we need to also connect the global scale to local realities. And this is some of the activities we do under the umbrella. We have about 10 working groups, one per thematic days. We are 47 group members. It says here 72 core partners, but we're actually now 86. Not all of them were fully committed or participating during just ahead of COP, but has joined after as well. We had 39 sessions, and we had 24 private events, over 850 physical participants, and over 2,500 virtual viewers during the week in Baku, or the weeks in Baku. There were 90 sessions, and I think this is one of the most important parts, that we had 90 sessions with water envoys participating in other pavilions or in other sectors sessions. And that has been the mantra that we have said, that water is floating through everything. So to be able to address the issues, we need to make sure that the water is an ingredient, and we also invite other sectors to come to the Water for Climate Pavilion and have cross-sectoral dialogues. And what outcomes did we participate in or influence or as a collective with these partners do? So we participated in the climate conference. We are in dialogue with negotiators and trying to raise the awareness of research and advocate for science-based cross-sectoral climate strategies. With water at the core, of course. We believe and argue that if water is not considered in societal planning in countries and regions and cities, it's likely to cost a lot of financial deficit or cause a lot of financial deficit, and it jeopardized the necessary fast transition that we are in need of setting in motion. So the UN Declaration on Water for Climate Action is one of the areas that we have for years been part of the build-up towards. At last COP before that in Dubai, we managed to bring water not only mentioned as a word, but in the context of cities and regional planning and wetlands restoration, etc., into the global goal of adaptation. That was a breakthrough and the first time ever that water was mentioned in that context. And this last COP in Baku were also aimed a lot towards bridging and bringing in water to the planning and the revisions of the NDCs, the national determination contributions. And the 𝗥𝗏𝗺 dialogue itself is aimed to serve as a COP-to-COP collaboration platform that fosters continuity and coherence on water-related climate action, and trying to ensure or aiming to ensure that there is a consistent focus on water and its interplay with climate change, biodiversity loss, pollution, desertification, and focusing on the actions that the international and regional at the international, regional, and river basin level. So this is the umbrella of this, and I would say that since we know that cities accounts for 70%, about 70% of the global carbon emissions, we know that the built environment contribute to 40%. There is a really stark reality underscoring that the urgent need to integrate urban aspects and regional aspects into sustainable infrastructure and nature-based solutions into our planning processes. So I would say that we identify 4 areas that we need to address on a higher level. Is the mainstreaming of water into climate adaptation and mitigation planning. It's the assessing of coordinating sustainable freshwater demands across sectors in terms of urban and town planning. It's about navigating a water-wise energy transition, and it's also protecting the water for nature within urban environments. So I would say that urban and town planners are uniquely positioned to turn these international policy frameworks into actionable local strategies, and this by integrating sustainable infrastructure, urban resilience, and nature-based solutions. And I believe that the work can be aligned with the national with the NDCs, also required to meet global climate targets. And if we put water at the heart of climate action, we believe that initiatives like this, arranged today by you in ISOCARP and RTPI, it provides an opportunity to actually initiate the exploration of innovative solutions that has and can emerge from COP29 and the previous COPs. Amongst these are the policies that you can find strategies in, and how to mainstream those solutions, whether it's nature-based and or green roofs or permeable surfaces into the city planning. So such approaches not only reduce emissions but also enhance biodiversity and improve the quality of life and health aspects. So 4 key strategies that we would like to suggest in this is for a transformation in urban and town planning perspective is the mainstreaming of water into climate mitigation by integrating water management into the NDCs, but also develop city-level water action plans to contribute to national targets. We would like to see an assessment of and a coordination of sustainable freshwater demands, and by that conducting comprehensive analysis of water availability at local and regional and global level. We would like to see the implementation of water efficient technologies in buildings and infrastructure. We would like to see that we navigate the water-wise energy transition by prioritizing renewable energy sources with lower water footprints, but also explore the innovations around cooling systems for urban areas that reduce water consumption. And finally, we would like to suggest that protecting water for nature within urban environments will and can be handled by restoring and protecting urban wetlands and green spaces, but also implementing blue-green infrastructure for carbon sequestration and flood management. Urban planners can shape the international policy, if I turn around the question, by aligning the strategies with national climate commitments, by incorporate those in water management, into the water management into NDCs, but also developing city-level actions plans that contribute to national targets and leverage on international climate finance for water-related mitigation and adaptation measures. Moreover, I would say that climate vulnerability mapping offers vulnerability mapping offers a powerful tool for understanding the diverse risks city face, and this by accounting also social and economic and cultural dimensions, and inclusive solutions can be developed addressing systematic inequities. And these efforts to us are critical in ensuring that underserved communities are not left behind in the transition towards a sustainable future. And I would like to just consider the urban water cycle as a case in point. Cities depend heavily on water systems, yet climate change exacerbates risks like flooding and droughts and pollution, and by integrating water-sensitive design and regional collaboration into urban planning, this can be adapted and mitigated in terms of handling these challenges and also ensuring more resilient and adaptive urban environments. And rounding up, I would say there's a few things that could be components in this ISO solutions, and how this can function as sequesters or sponges in terms of reducing carbon and reduce urban heat and manage stormwater and reduce floods, etc., and also enhancing biodiversity. We have a problem in the water sector because we lack some data, and here is where also urban planners can help providing those data, because we know that there are and there is data within many organizations, publicly or privately. It's about the sharing of data that could help everyone to self-help in terms of that. And we also believe that there's a need for polycentric governance and international cooperation, and this is how we can work along and together to enhance this. And of course, then finally, financing water-wise climate action is one of the lead components in this. And here we can ensure that the projects are integrated into the NDCs and other national instruments to address climate finance. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. Over to Liz.
Fantastic, thanks. So my name is Liz Sharp. I'm a professor of water and planning at the University of Sheffield in Britain. Timekeeper, do we have a full 6 minutes for this, or do we need less because we're running short of time?
If we can do it in a shorter time, that would be perfect, but
okay, so
let's try.
Yeah, so I'm going to put a question to Thomas in a minute, and then I'm hoping he can answer it quite briefly, and then I'm going to put another question. I'd like your votes and your support as audience on what that other question should be. Should I have something that emphasizes economic growth and the challenge of water alongside economic growth, or should I have something that emphasizes issues around inequality? Okay, my first question for Thomas is, you've given us lots of advice about how about the fit between the local and the international there, but what one piece of literature or website would you point the local planner who's concerned with water, concerned with how they integrate water stuff into the local institutions and planning, but that they don't think it's being done well enough at the moment? They want to integrate it better. They want to get something from the international process that they can make that argument with. Where are you going to point them to?
Well, stepping out of my role from 𝗖𝗵, I would say that one recommendation to at least have as a door opener would be the permanent website for Water for Climate Pavilion permanent website. So it's waterforclimate.net, and I can share the link in the chat with everyone. But all the organizations, whether they are public or private, or it's science or policy, they publish the documentation there. It's reports, it's instructions, it's guidelines, it's a lot of policy recommendations. So I would say that would be the knowledge hub that I would recommend as a representative of the Water for Climate Pavilion collective.
That's super useful, and it looks like somebody's already put it in the chat. So next question then, we've got how often people will say, yes, lovely idea, we'd love to make more space for water, we'd love to be paying more attention to providing it, but water's very, very expensive. Making space for water means knocking down homes, means doing all sorts of expensive things. Why should we prioritize water over all these other calls upon our very limited city funding?
Oh, and I have a few seconds and should be short. How much of water do you consist of?
99%, I suppose.
No, it's not. It's actually 68%, roughly. We need the intake of water, as does the nature around us, as does the food we consume, as does the clothes. I have a good example that on you could say virtual water. We in many Western-oriented countries like the one we are in now, we use about 120 to 140 liters per day. But if you look at the actual outtake of water, we use about 3,000 liters a day. And we're using the water as if we're going to the cash machine and taking out some money, but it's not affecting our account because it's happening somewhere else. So the pullover you have and the suit I have, they're all produced somewhere where water was needed in the production, and we don't pay for that. So yes, there's a price to water, but we need to make conscious decisions about how we are part of the planet and how we can influence also that other communities and less the more affected people and poor people can actually have a better life, and that has to be paid for, and we're not paying for it today.
Fantastic. I might add, perhaps we can't afford not to because of things like flooding and drought. I don't know whether it's really the same argument. Anyway, shall we move on and let them move on to a different topic? Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Over to 𝗂𝗍.
Thank you, Liz.
Thank you very much, and that was really smooth. We're running from adaptation to loss and damage. I hope you can see my slides. Just a thumbs up maybe
Yes, we
from
can.
Lee. Yeah, perfect. Awesome. Thank you very much. So yeah, my name is 𝗖𝗶𝗵𝗺𝗲. I'm with 𝗬𝗵𝗵𝗺𝗃's climate change team and urban environment team, and I'm also the special advisor to the Deputy Executive Director. I'm here together with my colleague and fantastic co-author of two tools that we want to present to you today, the Urban Vulnerability Atlas, as well as the multi-layered vulnerability analysis, and the overall 𝗖𝗇 flagship program, which is a program of 𝗬𝗵𝗵𝗺 where we get to more in detail, and also why does it actually matter for planners, and hopefully also for why COP matters for planners. So moving on to the next slide. As you all know, you are planners, so it's not much that is new to you, but we're currently at the tipping point of urbanization. We have over 55% of the world's population living in urban areas. We're looking at that number to be increased by 70% in 2050, and we really have to look at the where the urban growth is, and exactly also what type of urban growth that is that we're facing in the future trend. So where the most of the urban growth is actually not in your mega cities. They are about to shrink even further, but it's actually within the secondary cities, satellite cities, tertiary cities. It's in the economic corridors that are built between city elements and networks, as well as like what's the quality of urban growth that we are foreseeing. So to date, you have over 1 billion people living in informal settlements, and in the next 30 years, we will have an increase of that with over 3 billion people in informal settlements. But why I'm highlighting especially informal settlements is we all know where they live and how they live. They live in fragile and highly susceptible areas to climate change. They live in conflict-prone areas. They live in areas where vulnerabilities are the highest. We've done a little bit of facts and figures checking for you, so to really understand how that impact of quality of urbanization and trend of urbanization is really relevant also for planners, because actually urban areas, beyond the figures we've already heard, is also the hub of convergence of crises. So you have migratory crises, you have climate crises, and all of those trigger points lead to over 180,000 people moving to even further vulnerable areas, such as informal settlements. So it pushes really why effective urban planning is so needed, as we cannot continue looking into a future where urbanization also means the quality of urbanization goes down. We have a hard limit to how much we can adapt. We just heard it from the water sector. At some point, there is that momentum of loss and damage that is triggered by it, where our ecosystems are basically meeting their limit of adaptation. We already see that with the sea level rise in low-lying islands that become absolutely inhabited. We see that in the loss of biodiversity ecosystem, but also property, culture, heritage, livelihoods, and so on that are associated with loss and damage. So when we talk about loss and damage, we have on one side that really stark figure that within the last 19 years, we have suffered, or the world has suffered, at least $2.8 trillion in loss and damage, which is, I don't know who counted that, it's about $16 million per hour. That's really stark to say we don't have any time to waste. And this does not account for the unaccountable loss and damage, such as culture, integrity, society. It's where actually our social contract really breaks down if we do not act for the most vulnerable in our societies. And as I mentioned already, we have I have a co-presenter, Lee, so over to you on the challenges and the opportunities.
Thank you very much, Serene. So to basically emphasize this critical need for integrated climate adaptation planning, we'll highlight some of these statistics, some of these challenges and the trends that we're seeing in a bit more detail. So firstly, the damages that are being incurred by cities for the urban infrastructure damage is tremendous and growing each year. If we look at certain challenges like rising sea levels, we can think about the fact that there's 90% of urban areas that are coastal. The IPCC Special Cities Report and the UN Habitat World Cities Report have highlighted that these are also some of the most growing cities, these with people living in low-lying coastal zones, and they're highly vulnerable to storm surges and flooding. The damages are expected to reach $1 trillion annually by 2050 if measures aren't implemented. When we look at heat, which is becoming an ever-increasing challenge too, it's projected to cost urban economies 1.6 trillion annually by 2050. And these are simply figures and funding gaps that cities cannot address on their own. And as they lose these economic, this financing for cities, what that means is it translates into increased vulnerability and a lack of systemic resilience for the most vulnerable in cities. So when we look at the people living in informal settlements, like Serene suggested, they're the people that are highly affected by climate change, but that actually contribute the least to its main causes. And they're disproportionately affected. So there's a need to improve their infrastructure, their access to services, but also look at a whole load of other co-benefits that we can address by looking at integrated climate adaptation planning. In terms of opportunities, there's a whole load of opportunities in COP and other international policy fora and arenas allow us the chance to convene to maybe address these. But one of the key statistics that's come out in our research over the last couple of years is that while there's $6.9 trillion required to meet global climate resilience goals by 2030, actually 60% of the world's infrastructure isn't built. So we do have the chance here to address this by planning now and building for climate resilience now, anticipating the future challenges that we will face in the coming years. So we have this time-sensitive opportunity, but it is a tremendous one that we have if we can work together. If we can address this climate finance adaptation gap, particularly in cities, it would allow cities to implement measures that reduce the economic disruptions, but also the loss and damage felt across a range of sectors, as well as communities. And we want to show you in the coming slides how we aim to address this through one of our key flagship programs. So back to you, Serene.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so that flagship program that we've mentioned is called 𝗖𝗄𝗏. It stands for Resilient Settlements of the Urban Poor, and it's yunus flagship program that tries to mobilize large-scale investment in resilience for where vulnerabilities are the highest. So what we're trying to do is understanding the concept of vulnerability in the first place, so to then have investments decisions that are creating a pipeline of bankable resilient solution, creating the enabling environment, but also meeting that paradoxon of the finance gap that we've just mentioned before. So to bring in those key partners to really work together. 𝗖𝗄𝗏. Yeah, there it goes. 𝗖𝗄𝗏 is a portfolio that works currently in over 28 countries, least developing countries, developing countries, small island developing states mainly. There's a funding portfolio of 150 million at the moment, increasing over time, and most of our funding comes actually from our vertical funds. And what we've learned from that portfolio is that the vertical funds have set the scene for how vulnerability is identified. IPCC has set the scene for the vulnerability framework, the risk and vulnerability framework, which helped us to have a baseline for climate vulnerabilities. But our problem is often vulnerabilities as such are interconnected, compounding, cascading. They are triggering effects with each other that are not planned for when we think of the resilience building for a certain intervention or a certain investment. And so that brought us then to the idea to analyze our portfolio and understand better how can we standardize urban vulnerability in itself, and with which layers do we maybe want to start at. So we picked from our portfolio that I've just mentioned, we picked the layers of biodiversity, urban, and climate. And those layers, we then try to, through geospatial information, through multidimensional, multi-scala, as well as anticipatory data, information, and knowledge, to create basically that in those dimensions, layers of hotspots of vulnerability. Thank you. So the methodology that is behind the multi-layered vulnerability atlas is the multi-vulnerability assessment methodology, which is a step-by-step guide that walks you from preparation to mapping to analyze to intervention. And I do believe, as I'm running out of time, Lee, do we skip the video and then basically share you the link of the video, how it actually functions?
Yes, I think that could be best.
All right, okay. So the objective of that is, so you not only look at data and information at the moment, but also the potential expansion of urban growth, of biodiversity threats, of climate threats, climate scenarios. And so the current and the future projections are overlapped, so that you actually then have the evidence base for prioritized target interventions, for policymaking, programming, and investment trends. So this is how it would look like, and we would have loved to show you a little bit more of a video, but as we're running out of time, I'll keep it short. So you see here on the bigger picture, the analysis of the urban vulnerability assessment or atlas for Honiara, a city in Solomon Island, as you might know, where you see different parts of vulnerability overlap. And then in the left-hand smaller picture, you see hexagons. Maybe you don't see them, but those are the hexagons that overlap the vulnerabilities. Where the colors are darker, you have actually hotspots of vulnerabilities. If you were to click on those hotspots of vulnerabilities, they are scanned by dimension 30 by 30 meters, which then allows you to understand the different scenarios of vulnerabilities in the certain area, and therefore also how do you actually invest into resilience planning in a very resource-effective manner. So the key functions, as I mentioned, is that integrated layer. But what is so important, you can be the best GIS expert, and a local government usually don't have the capacity to invest into the best GIS expert, but it doesn't help you if you have collected and analyzed or collected and managed the data if it's not analyzed and visualized. So the Urban Vulnerability Atlas helps you to actually visualize your hotspots of vulnerabilities, and it helps you to go on scale, because it doesn't only look at one 30 by 30 hexagon, as mentioned before, but actually the cluster of it that then creates the hotspot. So it's hopefully also a decision-making tool for local governments, for planners, for us urban stakeholders, and where we also see the benefits of it is that resource optimization. Thomas has mentioned just before how important it is actually to understand data sets that are out there and kind of like convene them in one place. So it aims to do that, and it aims also to provide that data sets for everyone who likes to. So it's an open source tool. We didn't want to put it behind any paywall or anything, but there are data sharing agreements with local national governments that basically help us to share data sets in their not in the raw form, but in the analyzed form. And just to maybe also conclude, within each of those urban dimensions, they are governed by indicators in itself. Some of them are cluster indicator, but some of them are composite indicators. So to give a more holistic identity of the different urban dimensions, which hopefully then also helps with reporting and compliance for multilateral environmental agendas and beyond. Two things that I really like in the way we have applied it so far is the institutional capacity building, because that tool is not a standalone tool. It comes actually with a whole package of training of trainers and capacity building, as well as stakeholder engagement, because a lot of the information you have is not only GIS, it's also intellectual knowledge of your community. It's anecdotal knowledge, which then also is pasted into the story mapping of the analysis of the hotspots. So why does that matter for COP? I think I'm running slightly out of time, but happily and luckily, map was already presented by Yunus, so that was really great. And I can only then say, basically, it helps you to give you the evidence base for actions under such declaration as the map, gives you a visual and analytical tool. But also, if you think of the Baku Continuity Coalition, if you might know, that is the coalition that convenes COP27 to COP30. We have a common agenda that we can push forward into the next COP because it is relevant. It gives us a seat at the table, us as planners, as UN Habitat agencies, as ICLEI, as LGMA. So yeah, quite critical in itself. I'll skip that because of the interest of time, but I would love to share this one. In case you're interested, on the one side, you see the MVA, the Multi-Layered Vulnerability Handbook. You can access that, the step-by-step guide, the methodology behind the Urban Vulnerability Atlas, which currently is at demo stage. We have implemented it in 19 cities at the moment. And as we go, we will post there the different climate action plans and vulnerability profiles. So thank you very much. That was great to be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Over to Jack.
Thank you very much, Celine and Lee. That was great. And I think we could have spent an hour just talking about this, but we try to really give a broad overview over different perspectives. So this is why we keep it short. But I still would like to quickly introduce myself and then also ask one very quick question and hope that you can answer it very briefly, even if I know that you will not be able to do justice to the complexity. But first, my name is 𝗤𝗏. I'm together with Martina leading the Initiative for Climate Resilience Planning at ISOCARP. And otherwise, I'm working on urban resilience projects in South Asia. So what you're presenting is incredibly interesting, and I will for sure have a more detailed look at this as well. And I would really invite you to share the links also in the chat, because sometimes it's difficult for people to access it from the presentation. One question I would like to ask you is, what we heard a lot about this year and also last year is the loss and damage fund, different ways of financing for what is already lost or what is already damaged, without going into the details of the differences. But in a local level, how can planners support cities and other local governments in order to access these funds, in order to, well, on the one side, compensate for what has been already lost, but also prepare and adapt for what is to come? Over to you.
Thank you very much. I'll give a start and then Lee can add if you don't mind, 𝗤𝗏. Thank you so much for the question. Very quickly, yes, we do have the Loss and Damage Fund, but it actually doesn't yet operationalize as it is. So they are currently establishing a secretariat and the mechanism to it. But what really enticed us, there's actually a clause or a paragraph that asks for and a request for subnational governments to be included in the accessing Loss and Damage Fund. That's completely new, as none of the vertical critical fund actually gives any mandate to the subnational level. But if you think of where your loss and damage occur, also your climate impacts occur, they're on the ground. So it's a pity that the other funds haven't seen it, and I see a huge potential there. But it also means that still you would need the evidence base to even put a proposal forward to that loss and damage fund. And we've seen that with the other funds, the requirements are very, very high. It's very difficult to meet them. So if there is not a standardized approach for that, it gets really difficult. This is also where the MVA and the 𝗂𝗶𝗁 Atlas derive from, to help to overcome that knowledge gap and that ability of convening data sets that are there, even if they are scarce, into a storyline of like, these are like quantifiable losses, these are non-quantifiable losses. So to present your loss and damage, but also adaptation needs to donors, vertical funds, and hopefully also the loss and damage fund. Lee, over to you, maybe in 30 seconds.
Or 20.
Thank you, Seren. I think you covered it excellently. It's just to say, yes, this methodology goes beyond assessments to actual city resilience action planning and the preparation of bankable projects. So through the Atlas, we're presenting evidence in a way that is compelling, that is accessible, that is attractive, that you can take to a donor and actually state your case and your evidence base for a systemic climate resilience project. It's not a long report that sits on a desk. It's not something that's inaccessible. It's very visual and easily to understand and interact with. So we've found that that can be a tool that can help catalyze and mobilize resources. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Seren and Lee. Over to Tiana.
Thank you so much, Tjark. And as the infamous timekeeper, I will keep this very short. I'm Tiana 𝗵𝗵𝗺. I'm the ISOCARP Board and Scientific Committee member, and also member of the Initiative for Climate Resilient Planning, together with Tjark and Martina. I would like to open the floor for just one question from the audience. And as we're waiting for that question, I would just like to highlight maybe some of the very interesting messages that we heard throughout the presentations, like some of them being the importance of strengthening global multilateralism and fostering collaboration between national and local leaders. But then again, how do we get the public on board? And especially when it comes to clean transportation, which is still more costly than the current transportation options, as Theodora pointed out. For example, flying remains cheaper than rail transportation. Proximity planning is crucial, but it is going to be challenging to get the real estate sector, automobile sector on board, which are less likely to change, as well as the consumer preferences. We also heard about the importance of water, which is floating through everything, as Thomas mentioned, and we need to make sure that water is an ingredient, and we have to mainstream water, no pun intended, into climate adaptation and mitigation planning. And Seren and Lee really highlighted informal settlements as important and valuable, with valuable figures and facts, and understanding the urban vulnerabilities and their interconnectedness is crucial. It's important to have data sets, but it's also important to understand them. So with this, and as I see we don't have any more questions coming up, I will just maybe end with a very interesting notion, or let's say call for action by Yunus. Let's transform our town halls into mini COPs. And with that, I would hand over to Elizabeth and for the closing remarks. And Olafiyin, sorry, both of you. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Tiana. Unfortunately, I will just add a couple of minutes. Very insightful cyber Agora. So thank you everyone for participating, also for all our participants from across the world. I just want to highlight a few things, maybe adding to Tiana's points. So we know cities responsible for 70% of carbon emissions, that water takes space, that there is an increased urgency as we cross the 1.5 degrees, but also that these issues and the urgency will increasingly affect water. We know that 8.2 trillion was spent for loss and damages. So just to become aware of it, how that could be done while we mitigate, that drastic action is needed also to place public transport on the pathway, and also use the partnerships between urban planning and transport that's still a little too much divided. We need the urgent need also for systemic and structural solutions, again linked to water systems, transport, and the regional aspect beyond the city. There is the promise that we as ISOCARP are committed to sustainable urban development and the alignment with the COP goals. from the COP side that there is a shift being to the multi-level action, and that spatial planning has been mentioned for the first time. Again, with the special report and the COP30, more focus on cities. That's also an opportunity. As Yunus mentioned, there is a lot of ingredients that are in our hands, so we should grasp them. Going from advocating to local governments to be involved in the mini-COPs, but also as planners, how we can translate the policies into actionable strategies on the ground. Again, the role of urban planning as a key for the transport sector, but also for water, how urban planning can be transformed itself, taking into account water action plans and the regional water systems, but then also how urban planning can shape international policy. When it comes to responsibility, I think an interesting element was mentioned about new cities. It's not just it's cities that have to move because of climate, urban expansions, and so on. We had our first international conference on new regenerative cities. So for me, I think it's very clear that we have to go ahead with the continuation of this topic. There was also up to 30,000 people watching live when this started, this conference. So mainly in Asia, I think another indicator how important that is. That attracting finance is important to look at it from an integrated perspective. Again, urban planning has a role there as a platform where the different sectors can come together across silos. And then regard to call to action, again, highlighting two elements: partners to close the gaps and the finance paradox to bring in key partners. And I think across all the speakers was the focus on that many of the challenges seem to concentrate in low and middle income countries, with a particular under-addressed focus, I think, on informal settlements and how we can use vulnerability mapping, the different and diverse aspects of risk as a strategic tool for decision making. And I just want to close with a toast. We are 6 years old today, and I want to bring a toast to ISOCARP as a global society, being resilient, so we're still there, and we're looking forward to the next 100 years. To our members and partners that we are in this together. Thank you for all your insights and reflections. We're looking ahead to further collaborate with our planning sector to strengthen the aspect of planning in this climate endeavor, and of course also with the partners' collaboration across sectors, which is very much needed. And also a toast on the new year and 2025. That one of the speakers mentioned is a critical window of opportunity when it comes to cities and regions. Thank you. Over to you, Olafiyin.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. And thank you to all our speakers and all our attendees as well for the insightful conversation and for your patience staying with us through to this time. I wouldn't reiterate what Elizabeth and Srijana has already mentioned, the summary of all the discussions. And just as a takeaway for us, I want to encourage us to increase our effort and our commitment to advocating for increased recognition of the role of urban planning in addressing the climate change challenges and increased recognition of the part that we play. And also, I want to also encourage us to consider platforms for engagement similar to what we have here. I'm sure our institutes, we have other plans in the course of the year before the next COP30 to continue these conversations and take it forward. But we're also challenging you as well to create the informal platforms to ensure that there is interdisciplinary conversations among the planners and the other different built environment professions, including the financiers and investment sectors as well, to look at how we can sustainably address the challenges and move forward. Thank you. And a big congratulations as well to ISOCARP on your 60th anniversary. Thank you, everyone. And bye. Hope to see you at our next event. Bye.
Thank you. Can we
Thank you
make
so
a
much,
group
both.
picture before everyone leaves?
Yes, definitely. We should make a group picture. If you can all turn on your videos, your cameras.
Can somebody take a picture of the... Yeah.
Did anyone take a picture?
I did a couple, I think others as well. So I think thank you very much, everyone. Have a good evening, afternoon, wherever you are, and hope to stay in touch. Bye-bye.
Likewise,
Thank you so much.
take care, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.